Hey folks, Dust here, and I want to discuss a pretty big roster move that we've been waiting to hear about for some time. That is, of course, the revamp to Mousesports, as we have seen them make many moves here just the day before I recorded this video. And just to run through that really quick, they've basically brought on karrigan, Frozen, and woxic to play alongside chrisJ and Rops, and they've already benched Styko, and they've let go of Sunny and Oscar. Now, of course, originally they were also going to bench chrisJ, but they have decided to keep chrisJ on board to play alongside the other four members that I've mentioned. And so I want to just kind of look at this move, kind of break it down, talk through it, think about what it could mean for the future of Mousesports and the future of these players, how good the team might be, things of that nature. And so without further ado, let's get into it. So obviously this team was in need of change, and you could tell that changes were around the corner because over a month ago it was announced that chrisJ and Styko were to be benched and that the team was exploring options to revamp the team. And this was, of course, after they had failed massively at the most recent European minor and weren't even able to attend the most recent major at IM Katowice 2019. This was a really big result against them, considering they were a top 5 team in the world. They were really the only team ranked that highly that didn't make at least the major, at least the challenger stage, right? Obviously Fnatic, we know, kind of flopped once they made it to the initial stage of the major, and they were another top 5 ranked team, I guess you could say, or certainly within the top 10 that had their failure. But this one was even more massive. This was just crazy, especially considering the fact that leading up to the European minor, they didn't look that bad. They actually had a top 4 finish at the EPL Season 8 finals, including beating Na'Vi and having a win over a Renegades team that we now know was certainly ramping up quite nicely. They played really well at the major, and they, had some talented players, had some good structure with Casada as a coach, and as actually adapting to the IGO role pretty well. So actually kind of a legit win against Renegades at this event, alongside beating Na'Vi. Yeah, they did lose to Made in Brazil, but they only got eliminated because they lost the series to Australia. So actually a pretty good finish at EPL Season 8 on their way to this minor. Then they flopped. Now, granted, it's worth noting that prior to the EPL finals, this team certainly really did have their ups and downs. It almost seemed like they alternated between having a good finish at a tournament, or at least a decent finish at a tournament, and then having a really disappointing finish. So, for example, they did okay at IM Chicago, again, only getting eliminated by Australia, so okay result there, but still not really like a crazy deep run. But then they massively fail at Starlighter Season 6. So, again, a little bit of back and forth there. Then, right before that, they actually won ESL1 New York. That was a super huge finish, beating Team Liquid in the finals. But right before that, they went out pretty much dead last at the Face It Major, at least that next stage of the major. Didn't go far there at all. We're just, 15th, 16th, something like that. And this was, of course, right after they had just had a top 4 finish at Stockholm. So you can kind of see this crazy up and down. And in the midst of all that, they obviously had the whole experiment with Snacks coming in for Styko. And outside of the ESL1 New York result, really didn't get a whole lot out of Snacks and out of that lineup, and had brought Styko back. But once they got Styko back, as you could see at this European minor before IM Katowice, they still could never really get their act together. So it was certainly true that this team was in need of some type of change, and probably a really big change, not just, -1, +1, but something that would be a lot more drastic, which is what this move is that we're looking at now. And on top of the results itself, you could just tell that certain individuals were starting to cool off. Like Sunny really started cooling off at the end of the year. Rops was really having his issues towards the end of the year. And so some of the individuals this team really relied upon, because they did play kind of a faster pace, aggressive style that was based on individual skill and playmaking ability of some of these star players, that they were really starting to lose some of their shine, and that really did kind of impact how the team could operate. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing to think about is through several different interviews that kind of came out, you could just tell that apparently this team was barely practicing. They were barely playing together. You could tell that there seemed to be some type of internal issues going on. I mean, hell, there was that one like Belo Horizonte tournament where Oscar didn't even play and they used nothing as a stand-in. So there was a lot of weird things kind of going on where you could tell that something was up internally on top of them not getting results. Like maybe you could get past internal issues if results are fine. You kind of keep the family together, so to speak, just because of that. But when you're having your results deteriorate and you're having internal struggles, then, that combination is definitely a nasty one, and you can kind of tell that changes are going to be on the horizon. So yeah, essentially what happened is right after the minor, basically in early February, the team announced they were benching chrisJ and Styko. And so at this point, you thought maybe they'll keep Sunny, Oscar, and Rops, kind of the 3 star players of the team, and try to build around that. Obviously, karrigan's name was being thrown around pretty early on by people as kind of a suitable person to come in and help this team and be an in-game leader, so that seemed kind of like a given. But as far as the 5th goes, it was really hard to tell. Now, I'll also say that community reaction to chrisJ's benching was actually quite controversial because, on the one hand, people were quite upset about it because they felt like chrisJ actually was kind of the face of Mousesports in many ways. He had been, on the team for so very long. He had made so many sacrifices in what role he was playing throughout his career at Mousesports, being a primary operator back in the day, then having to kind of give that up, and then kind of being more of a supportive element, then turning into an in-game leader. And really, he had kind of been an entry rifler a lot of the time, and more recently, kind of setting up someone like Sunny, or setting up someone like Oscar's AWP, while Rops and Styko or whoever was kind of playing the edges of the map. So his role certainly, moved around a lot, and he sacrificed a lot of individually. He probably could get more frags and look like a better player if he got to play his main role, but he really did kind of make the adjustments needed for the betterment of the team. And so it was definitely a tough pill to swallow to see chrisJ get benched, because you felt like he could maybe still add value to this team, whether it be a supportive element, a secondary caller element, even if you were bringing in an IGL, or some type of entry fragger to set up a star player like a Sunny, like he had done in the past. Maybe keep doing that, but just add some other pieces onto the team to kind of help facilitate that. And so there was a lot of controversy around that. I myself thought that, cutting chrisJ didn't really seem to make sense, that maybe you could give it a shot a little bit longer with him, because he could fill so many roles. And, he was definitely that kind of player that seemed like he was willing to sacrifice and be a team player, which is a great attitude to have. But then the positive of that was, well, maybe he can go join another team and get his main role. Like a lot of people were saying, maybe he could be, an opper for big, and that could be a great move for all sides, and could get chrisJ back to, being more of a star player, or being more of an effective fragger, and kind of let him get some shine or something like that. And there was also even a lot of, talked around about, hey, maybe he should join FaZe and be the in-game leader of that team, because it's a very similar style of team to Mousesports, with a lot of individuals, a looser, aggressive style. chrisJ can kind of facilitate that, but then obviously a lot of concerns about what's the relationship between chrisJ and Nico. They kind of, left on bad terms when Nico departed Mousesports way back when. So there was definitely a lot of discussion around all of that too, right? And then the Styko benching, I think people have kind of over-romanticized Styko a little bit. Yes, he is a support player. Yes, he does bring a lot to a team as far as communication and being willing to sacrifice, and he definitely has that supportive attitude, and he can be very, good in that role in-game. But yeah, he could be a burden on the fragging department, which would be fine if you had a bunch of star-level players that, was really kind of, lifting their weight and doing a fantastic job. But Mousesports were struggling to get that at times from Sunny and Rops towards the end. And it's always an awkward situation when you cut a player and you bring them back and you try to put him back in the team. And, and sometimes it can work, I guess. It's apparently going to fucking work for chrisJ again. But, sometimes it doesn't always pan out that way. And sometimes there are still better options. Even if he can be good in the supportive element, if you can find a player who's more skilled that can frag a little bit better, that can also fulfill those roles, then, that might be the better option, right? Not to say that this is going to work out fine and dandy. Maybe, they will quite miss Styko, down the line or something like that. But it felt like even when he returned and they kind of got back to what they used to do, it still didn't just seem to work. So I think Styko could maybe still have value somewhere else, but on this team, it just didn't seem like it was going to work out. So now it comes down to the move itself, which we're going to talk about, which in the end, chrisJ is still back on the team after being announced that he was benched. Like, holy fucking shit, haven't we been here before? It just feels like Mousesports should maybe just take a fucking brief second, take a deep breath, and before you decide to officially announce the benching of chrisJ, you should probably make sure you have your roster completely sorted out before you make an announcement like that. It makes you look kind of silly. It almost makes you look like you're kind of mismanaging your roster. You don't really know what you're doing. It just doesn't come off looking very good from like a PR perspective. Of course, in the end of the day, it's all cool to see chrisJ remain on the team and be a part of the team. And again, a lot of people didn't want him to be benched in the first place, but man, it just looks bad. The optics of this are not good. To keep benching this guy and then bringing him back, it just seems really fucking unreal. So that's kind of just the thing I had to say up front. So yeah, chrisJ comes back. Rops remains on the team. And then the other big thing, though, is that they got rid of Oscar and Sunny. Now, this to me really stinks, because I think losing Sunny is a fucking major miss for Mousesports. I think that through the bulk of late 2017 through basically mid 2018, really until like the last 5 or 6 events that Sunny played, he was the number 2 entry rifler in the world, in my opinion, behind Dupree. I think that he was fantastic within that role and consistently being able to perform. At times, he was the carry player for Mousesports, really carrying them to some of their big results, especially when sometimes Rops would have an off, event or an off series, or maybe Oscar would have like an off game or something like that. Sonny was like their bread and butter, man. I feel like he was the most consistent performer on the team, but in one of the most difficult roles to be able to do that from. So I think losing Sonny is a big miss. Yeah, people can say that he kind of cooled off and, his form kind of dipped, and that might be grounds for considering removal. But come on, man, the environment of that team was pretty dog shit towards the end, and I think that he's the type of player that if you get everything stabilized, you get him in a team that he believes in, and he becomes motivated, and he gets in the right mindset, this dude can still be one of the best entry fraggers in the world. So I think that losing Sonny is actually a really big hit here. Now, obviously, I know that, in the official announcements and stuff, they talked about how this is kind of a mutual decision and benefit both parties. I never really know how true that is. There's almost never a mutual breakup in many ways, so I'm not sure who kind of pushed this move, whether it was more the organization or more Sonny. Maybe both people agreed to some degree, but I feel like usually there's at least one side of it that's a little bit more for the move than the other, and the other just has to kind of accept it and then kind of realize, yeah, maybe this can work out for both of us. But yeah, so I can't really know. If Sonny did just want to leave the team and there was no way Mousesports could keep him, then like fair enough. I guess I can't be mad that he's gone then. But if it was Mousesports who decided to cut Sonny, then I think that's a little bit ridiculous. I think he still could have brought a shit ton of value to this team. And who knows, maybe there was also some players that they were bringing in that weren't going to work with him maybe. I can't know what the inner dynamics are of that situation, but from an outside perspective, I think losing Sonny's pretty big. And look, I think losing Oscar also can be considered pretty big. I mean, this guy was typically a really monster opper most of the time. Yeah, sure, he would have his off times. Yeah, sure, he could go missing sometimes, but usually overall he was quite good. And I do think that some people have been overly harsh about his in-game performances. I think that more often than not he was actually quite good. And sometimes when I hear people talk about Oscar, they almost make it sound as if he was bad more than he was good, or that the ratio between good games and bad games was not good enough or something like that. And I feel like that isn't the case. I think he was good more often than not. Yeah, there were definitely some kind of concerns with this whole situation where he didn't go to Belo Horizonte. And look, even when he first joined Mousesports, I remember this back in 2016, he played like a Gfinity Invitational. The team didn't do well. He didn't do well on his debut coming from Hellraisers, and then he just basically dipped out and you didn't hear from him until he returned to the team, kind of much later. So yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of weird things like that with Oscar, and I've heard some other just like rumors about, just him kind of having a different personality or attitude that sometimes wouldn't mesh with teammates and things like that. So I don't know if that factors in. I don't know if he wanted to leave. Again, if he did want to leave, then maybe there's nothing Mousesports could really do to want to keep him on board. And so in that regard, I can understand it that that's the case, but I still think that these are actually big name players to lose who actually, I think if you would have kept Oscar, Sonny, Rops, chrisJ, and karrigan kind of found ways to repurpose some of these players or something like that, I think they still could have brought a lot of value, and this could have been a really good team. Not to say that I don't like some of the players that Mousesports have picked up to replace these guys, but yeah, man, I don't know. I feel I'm a little bit worried about losing some of these players. I think you should have at least kept Sonny. If you wanted to get rid of Oscar because you were having issues there and you wanted to take a role on woxic, who's definitely been performing pretty well for Hellraisers and, has been a monster in the Tier 2 scene and had like a big face at Major, fair enough. I can understand that decision, but losing Sonny, I don't know, man. I don't know if I like that. So what does the team have now? Let's kind of get into that to finish off the video. So they've retained Rops, which I think is a good move. He's still a very young player, and despite the fact that he did really start to cool off towards the end of 2018, really had his issues, I think that maybe he still can bring a lot of value to this team. Maybe it's just a little bit of a slump. Maybe it's because of the environment of the team that caused him to deteriorate. The whole snack situation, he did lose a couple of spots in that. Maybe just the kind of instability of bringing Styko back and all that. Maybe that affected him some way as a player. I'm not really sure. I'm not sure why his form kind of towards the end. He would still usually be okay stats-wise overall for a tournament, but you certainly notice that he would go to having more off games and more or off series than he used to. And this guy used to go like plus 30 to plus 70 across an entire event. And then you were starting to see him kind of just barely go positive and even sometimes go into the negative. So it's definitely true that his fragging did go down, but I can't know why that's the case. I mean, that really hadn't happened to him other than when he first joined the team. He was first just kind of transitioning to playing on Mousesports and playing into league competition regularly. But I mean, I would say, by mid to late 2017, he really came into his own, and he really was that way through really the first half of 2018. It wasn't until ESL1 Cologne in July where you started to see him have a little bit of trouble. And then even then, he followed that up immediately with a really great performance at Stockholm, I think, in September. So it was really only like, the last 3 or 4 months of 2018 where he really started to have his issues. So I think that retaining Rob's actually a good idea. I think he's still a young talent that has a lot of room to grow, and maybe someone like karrigan can kind of help bring him back to form, maybe help find better ways to use him to make him feel more comfortable or to get more out of him. Who really knows? I think it's a good piece to keep around to try to work with karrigan and try to see, what you can do. And if down the road doesn't work out, then, you can replace him if you need to. But for right now, I think he's perfectly fine to keep. Then, yes, they did retain chrisJ. I've already been through this a little bit, but I think on this team, he can still have some impact. Yeah, it's true that he would rarely go positive across an entire tournament, but you could just see from an eye test the impact he could have making a big play to kind of get the team going on a T side, or setting up someone like Sunny by being kind of the first guy in. When he did have an op in his hands as a secondary opper, or when he kind of filled in for Oscar at Bello and stuff like that, the dude still has a really nasty op, and he definitely can be a strong secondary opper for this team going forward. Also, now that he has some experience being an in-game leader of, a guy like Robs, and of a system that maybe Mousesports will continue to use under a guy like karrigan, because again, definitely some similarities in style between a FaZe and a Mousesports. I think that he could definitely be a nice second mind to bounce ideas off of if you're karrigan, kind of be that secondary caller for the team. And as long as he doesn't try to overrule karrigan or cause some type of internal instability in leadership, I think he can be a nice asset to the leadership of the team and be like another veteran to help bring up some of these young guys like a Frozen, like a woxic, things of that nature. So yeah, I think keeping chrisJ is actually quite nice for now. He can be that supportive element. He's shown that he's capable of playing multiple roles, and he's willing to sacrifice and willing to be that team player. Yeah, I actually really quite like him kind of sticking around for now, and we'll just have to see how it goes. And now it comes to the players that they've brought on board. So obviously karrigan being kind of the big one, coming in to be the captain, after standing in for Envy for this last major cycle, and, having been benched for FaZe for some time now, he now finds himself a new kind of long-term home, which is another top team in the world. So he's not dropping too far down the totem pole, especially considering how FaZe has really had their issues. He might wind up in a better situation depending on how things play out here. Now with karrigan, this is a guy who can play a nice, loose, aggressive style of Counter-Strike, which some of these players are very much used to. So I think that that's going to mesh up pretty well. I think that he's proven time and time again he can come into a team and kind of revamp it and cause it to be successful. Look at TSM. Before they became Astralis. Look at what he was able to do initially with FaZe, really for his first year there. It wasn't until kind of early to mid 2018 that it started to kind of crumble. So he's really good at starting teams up and finding roles for people and establishing some type of initial system, gives somewhat of a foundation to the start of a team. I think my issue with karrigan, though, is that the T-sides did look really fucking poor on FaZe. Like, even starting to E-League Boston and going through a lot of kind of mid-2018, there was so many failed T-sides that caused his team to get upset or not make as deep of a run as they needed to, or not win a trophy. And I don't know how much blame to assign karrigan to that, though, because FaZe's T-sides still struggle a lot since he's departed. And so I don't know if it was the players he was with not listening to him, or if there was just, conflicts in, people's philosophy on the game, or if he gave them too much freedom. I can't really know, but I do know that some of the T-sides look pretty atrocious from FaZe while karrigan was still the in-game leader of that team through early and mid-2018, and so that does cause me to be a little bit concerned about what the T-sides on this team might look like, because I think it's all fine and dandy to give people freedom and play a looser, aggressive style, but there still needs to be some level of structure. There still needs to be, players being on the same page and working together and not just pushing by themselves, and, having proper spacing, setting up trade potential. Like, you still need to have some basics down to look like a well-run team and not just be everyone kind of running freestyle and hoping for the best out of individual play. Granted, there are some heavy hitters on this team that can make individual plays, like woxic's op, like, someone like Rops, when he gets back into form, can certainly be a really good mid to late round player. But all in all, there still needs to be something there that's consistent, and it needs to look like someone's actually running the team instead of the players running themselves, I guess is my point. So that's definitely something I'm going to keep an eye on. I definitely have faith that maybe in a new environment with, players who are on board, that, he could probably do a lot better as an in-game leader. I definitely think that he's good at least forming, like, again, a basic foundation, getting a map pool started, being pretty good in the pick ban, not making wacky decisions there. And so I think he can definitely bring a lot of value to this team, because remember, this team hasn't really had a traditional in-game leader in quite some time. chrisJ did it very much out of necessity. That wasn't like his, normal role as a player or what he was used to doing. So I think that in itself can be a really big benefit. And so I think that this is a great home for karrigan, and I hope to see him adjust well to it and do well. Now we'll talk about the last two new players to the team, and we'll start with Woxic. From an eye test, this dude is a fucking monster, dude. He has crazy firing speed. He hits amazing shots. He can even hit the stable shots as well. It's not like he has like the Henny disease where he'll miss like the easy shots. He can hit those too. And he has kind of that Fallen factor, I remember, from like, let's say Fallen from 2016, where he just somehow gets more than one kill in situations where you feel like he should at most be able to get one frag. In these really chaotic situations where he's kind of getting pushed from multiple angles, you would think, yeah, he's one and done, or maybe he won't even get a kill at all because he's just getting overwhelmed. Now, this dude will somehow find ways to get 2 or 3 kills out of those situations, and he doesn't have the fear of being aggressive. He can definitely be very assertive. He can definitely be a playmaker. I was, really high on this guy watching him throughout 2018. Whenever I was at some of the DreamHack Open events that he was at, or like BetsNet Masters, and some of the other things he's played in that I've watched, he's just looked so damn impressive. He also had a pretty monster performance at the Face It Major against the likes of a Team Liquid and a Fnatic. Despite the fact that they lost to Team Liquid in the top 8 at that event, he still individually looked really strong against Team Liquid there, and he looked really good against a Fnatic team that was doing pretty well. So, man, he's definitely a great opera to pick up. He's quite young, so he's got a lot of room to grow, a lot of room to develop. I think, Angel did a lot with him on Hellraisers, but I think that maybe, working with karrigan and coming up a level, maybe he's going to be able to develop even more as a player. I think that the sky's the limit for this guy. I really feel confident in Woxic. I think that this is actually a pretty good replacement for Oskar. Like, if you had to lose Oskar, Woxic coming in, I think could wind up being an upgrade in many ways. I think I have been more impressed when I test watching Woxic play than Oskar sometimes. Certainly Oskar could be hit some super nasty shots and be really assertive and stuff like that as well, but I think Woxic can be a suitable replacement. I think that he can fill those shoes quite nicely. I think there has been a couple of struggles from him, sure, like at IEM Katowice, but overall really solid for 2018. I know he's also had his issues with like visa problems and not being able to attend tournaments, so that obviously raises a little bit of concern because you obviously need this guy around full time if you're going to be a top team in the world like Mousesports is aiming at. But I actually really like this move. I actually have a lot of faith in Woxic. I'm kind of on that hype train. And then finally, we'll finish up talking about Frozen, the young gun, 16 years old, coming on the team from Slovakia. I think I first heard his name back in 2017, so maybe he was only like 14 or 15 years old whenever he kind of first caught people's attention, just because he was putting up big numbers in kind of his local scene and all of his online play within like Slovakia and players in the Czech Republic and things of that nature, playing on like Exaltis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, or Exaltis, or again, I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce that. But anyway, it's worth knowing that he has very little big LAN experience. I mean, the biggest LANs this guy's played at is like Copenhagen games. He played at one minor. He played like an MDL LAN and a global challenge. So he doesn't really have a lot of big LAN experience. Most of it's local stuff. He definitely dominated the local scene, but only very recently have we even seen him play in a mixed international team. I mean, he mostly played with Czech and Slovakian players. It was only like here in January, just a couple of months ago, that you saw him play with that No Chance team, which has like Micah Laley and Crystal and a couple of different players that have come through that team. And so very limited online play, even on the international front. Like the European minor for E-League Boston might be the biggest event he played in, which he did well to help his team qualify for that, beating teams like Heroic, Godsent, and LDLC, and he put up big numbers in those games. But at the minor itself, the team didn't really do much of anything. I've even rarely seen him play against top teams online. And when I have seen him sometimes play against like an Ants or a Valiant or an AGO or a Kingwin, so not even big teams, just kind of like notable tier 2 teams, he would sometimes really struggle individually against those teams. It's real hard to read what kind of player he's going to be. Yes, he is quite young. Yes, sometimes he puts up monster numbers online. Yes, he has put up monster numbers in some like smaller local lands, like kind of within his region. But I've never seen him really get to many notable, even tier 2 LAN events, for one. And then for two, I've definitely seen him at times struggling against top teams online. So I really don't know what he's going to be like when he gets exposed to top international teams on a regular basis. I'm really skeptical about what type of player Frozen's going to be. Like, I haven't watched him too much, to be perfectly honest, so I'm going to, like, withhold judgment entirely, but I am quite skeptical. I'm not going to go ahead and say that he's going to fail, because, again, I haven't seen him enough, but I just feel like this is actually quite a big gamble. I think a lot of people will be hyped by this pick because of how young he is and how flashy he can be and how big his numbers can be sometimes, but in reality, man, if I had to choose between keeping Sunny and taking a gamble on Frozen, I would take fucking Sunny every day of the week, and you're crazy not to, by the way, if you disagree with this. I don't know how you could objectively say otherwise when Sunny's proven it time and time again on a top international level. Again, I think he was the second best entry fragger in the world. If Frozen's going to play a similar role to what Sunny was, then I think that this could wind wind up being a massive downgrade in that position, but I'm not sure if maybe the roles will shuffle around this team with the new lineup. Again, I think woxic can actually fill the shoes of Oskar, but Frozen filling the shoes of Sunny, if you're trying to make that comparison, I'm really skeptical about that. If he turns out to be amazing, if karrigan turns out to be able to develop him into a player that can play within a system and play at a top level, then tip your hat to karrigan for developing the guy, and then yeah, I'll just kind of have to nod in accordance to Frozen if he does wind up doing it. Again, if he can be a good player, this team could be sick, because I think woxic's going to be sick. I think Rops can get back to form. I think chrisJ can have impact and at least have value. Same with karrigan as an in-game leader. And so if you add Frozen on good form next to like a monster woxic and like Rops back in form, this team could have very good firepower to be a very top team. So it could be great, but I'm just a little bit worried about Frozen. I don't know enough about him, and I don't think he's got enough exposure to top teams, which he's going to get a ton of it on Mousesports. So yeah, I think the future of this team will actually hinge a lot on how good Frozen's going to be. And if woxic can keep it up and if Rops can get back on form, I think that those are kind of the three biggest factors. And if karrigan can find use of these players and kind of keep a good T-side going consistently, like those are some of the red flags, I guess, I'll kind of keep eyes on, so to speak. But I think this team definitely has a lot of potential. This could be a really spicy team with all the other struggles that some of the top teams are having outside of like Astralis and Liquid and maybe Navi to a degree. Like with FaZe kind of falling off a little bit. Made in Brazil, they just had a really bad WESG event after a pretty good major, so not really sure where they're at just yet. I think this team could certainly still be like a top 5 team in the world and maybe could challenge at times for titles, even if everything goes right. So I don't think they're going to like beat Astralis probably, but I think that, if they happen to avoid Astralis in the tournament, like maybe this team could beat like a Liquid in a semifinal or something. I think this team, if everything goes right, could definitely be an elite team. So definitely excited to see how it plays out. I definitely have my concerns, but I definitely see a lot of potential as well. So hope you folks enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe for more content. Catch you next time.